Throughout the blood-stained corridors of history, there are few devices which have come to symbolise the cruelty of torture as powerfully as the rack. The simple yet horrific mechanism was designed not merely to punish, but to extract information, break the will, and make a public example of those accused of heresy, treason, or conspiracy. It epitomised state-sanctioned brutality, its wooden frame and turning rollers engineered to turn human bodies into grotesque parodies of themselves. Used across Europe from the Middle Ages into the early modern period, the rack has left an indelible legacy in the annals of Inquisition and martyrdom. Amongst its victims were brave souls like Anne Askew and Nicholas Owen, whose bodies were literally torn apart for their faith and silence. Today we look at the rack, and to support our channel, please click subscribe. Now, the origins of the rack are difficult to pinpoint precisely, but devices designed to stretch the human body appear to have existed in various forms since antiquity. The Greeks and Romans employed similar instruments for punishment and interrogation. However, it was in medieval and early modern Europe that the rack gained its most notorious form and function. The standard rack was a rectangular wooden frame, slightly elevated off the ground. At each end of the frame was a roller or a drum. The prisoner's wrists were tied with cords to the top roller and the ankles to the bottom. As the rollers were turned, often by hand-cranked mechanisms or pulleys, the cords would slowly tighten, pulling the body in opposite directions. The stretching caused excruciating pain. Muscles tore, ligaments snapped, joints dislocated, and in very severe cases, limbs could be torn from their sockets. Whilst the rack did not usually kill its victims outright, it did leave permanent damage. Dislocations of the shoulders and hips were very common, and survivors were often left disabled for the rest of their lives. The point of such torment and torture was to coerce confession, extract names of co-conspirators, or force the recantation of their beliefs. The pain was relentless, and because the skin was rarely broken, the victim could be actually racked repeatedly over several sessions. In England, the rack came into regular use during the late medieval and Tudor period, particularly during the reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Ironically, it was technically illegal under English common law, which did forbade torture. Yet the Crown got around the restriction by authorising torture through the royal prerogative or via special commissions from the Privy Council, or they simply just ordered torture themselves. One of the most infamous examples of the rack's use in England was in the Tower of London, where a device known as the Duke of Exeter's daughter was housed. This particular rack was named after the 15th century Constable of the Tower, and became synonymous with the horrors inflicted within the Tower's dungeons. Today, you can imagine it would have been housed inside of the White Tower, which is a central part of the Tower of London, and inside the dungeons, that's probably where the rack would have been, and no one would have heard the screams of the victims. Now, Anne Askew, a Protestant martyr, stands as one of the most harrowing examples of what the rack could do, not just to the body, but to the spirit. She was born into a noble Lincolnshire family in 1521, and Anne Askew embraced Protestant theology at a time when England was still wrestling with its religious identity in the wake of Henry VIII's break from Rome. In 1546, she was arrested and charged with heresy for denying the Catholic doctrine of transubstantiation. Her calm defiance and articulate arguments stunned her interrogators, but what came next was even more shocking. As a gentlewoman, or even just a woman, she should have been spared torture, yet her resilience in naming no names infuriated her accusers. She was racked in the Tower of London under the direct supervision of Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley and Sir Richard Rich, both of whom personally allegedly turned the wheels of the rack. As the ropes pulled her body taut, her bones were wrenched from their sockets. She later wrote, and I quote, "I was then racked because I would not express things that they wished me to say, and then the lieutenant caused me to be loosened from the rack." Despite the agony, she did not give in. So brutal was her torture that afterwards she could neither walk nor stand. When she was eventually burned at the stake at Smithfield, she had to be carried in a chair. Anne Askew's story became a symbol of Protestant courage and the extreme lengths that the state and king or queen would go to in enforcing religious beliefs. Nicholas Owen was another victim of the Tower of London's rack, though his story is one of cunning, devotion, but also tragedy. A Jesuit lay brother during the late Elizabethan era, Owen was known for his role in building priest holes, hidden compartments in the homes of recusant Catholics who were skipping church, and inside these holes outlawed priests could hide during raids. For nearly 2 decades, Nicholas Owen worked tirelessly to protect his fellow Catholics from persecution, using his carpentry skills to build ingenious hiding places in walls, floors, chimneys, and staircases. His efforts saved countless lives, but he became a prized target of the government. In 1606, after the Gunpowder Plot heightened anti-Catholic sentiment, Owen was captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London. His captors knew he had a knowledge of safe houses and priest hiding networks. When he refused to give over information, he was racked with such severity that his body, already frail from a lifetime of injury and illness, gave out. He died under torture, repeatedly disemboweled by the strain of the device, and also a hernia burst. The authorities claimed he had taken his own life, but few believed this. Owen was later canonised as a martyr by the Catholic Church, and his death, like Anne Askew's, revealed how the rack was not just a tool of extraction, but of execution in slow motion. The psychological torment of the rack matched its physical agony. Victims were usually shown the device before they were bound, to terrify them into confession. The anticipation of pain, the smell of blood, the cries of earlier victims, all combined to break the will. Unlike other torture methods that relied on sharp instruments, fire or whipping, the rack worked silently and methodically. It didn't cut the skin, but destroyed from within. This also made it more insidious in some ways, leaving victims disfigured, disabled, and mentally broken without shedding one single drop of blood. Moreover, the rack was slow. Turned gradually by hand, it could be paused and resumed, tightened and loosened, allowing for sessions of sustained torture. It could be used in stages over days, each turn a notch towards madness or death. Its use also reflected the brutality of the legal and religious systems that did deploy it. In an age where authority depended on conformity, whether to the church, the monarch, or the state, non-compliance was treated as sedition. The rack was the instrument by which the defiant were unmade. Now the use of the rack did decline in England by the late 17th century. By 1640, its legality was openly questioned in Parliament, and by the time of the Glorious Revolution, torture was effectively abolished in English law. Nevertheless, stories of the rack continued to haunt the popular imagination. In continental Europe, particularly in places where the Inquisition was deployed, like Spain, torture persisted somewhat longer, but the rise of Enlightenment thinking and legal reform eventually consigned the rack to the museums of horror, where today some devices still exist. The rack is a chilling symbol of how states have used psychological and physical suffering to enforce obedience. People like Anne Askew and Nicholas Owen remind us of resilience of faith and conscience in the face of unspeakable cruelty. Though it has long since disappeared from the dungeons of justice, the rack endures as a grim reminder of what happens when power is allowed to torment the body in its quest to control the soul. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please click subscribe down below. It really does help. And once again, thank you so much for watching.